Welcome to PC Gaming Tech Summary. I'm your host, Gamer. And today we look at the new Windows 10 update, which may or may not affect some games. We'll look at a few benchmarks and compare it to the new NVIDIA graphics driver that's been released as well. And I'll give you a few tips about the 3060 12 gigabyte in regards to overclocking and underclocking. I found a few things that may help you if you tend to tinker with your settings. So sit right back, have a cup of coffee, and we'll get into it. The new Windows 10 update of 10 August 2021 and the NVIDIA driver update 471.68 have not changed FPS results in the games I have tested. And those games are Shadow of the Tomb Raider with ray tracing shadows, Rise of the Tomb Raider, Death Stranding with DLSS, Far Cry New Dawn, Hitman 3 Dartmoor, Hitman 3 Dubai, Control with ray tracing, and Cyberpunk with ray tracing. So what I've done is a little analysis of how frequency affects frames per second FPS in these games. So I've only done this in 4K. Okay, so because I game on a 60 hertz monitor and it's 4K and I want to target 60 frames per second. So I will just explain to you why the 3060 12 gigabyte is a good card to meet those needs for 4K gaming. If you look at the blue square, that is underclocking the memory of the 3060 to around 7,000 megahertz. Now the red square, or the red column, is out of the box settings, which is at 7,500 megahertz. Okay, so that's when I say out of the box, that means that graphics card was shipped to me, I put it in the computer, and the settings that it has to start with, those are the out of the box settings. Okay, so the yellow columns, yellow square, that is overclocked, so that's bumping up the frequency of the memory up around 1,000 megahertz, okay, to reach 8502. Alrighty, so if we look at the first game, Shadow of the Tomb Raider with ray tracing shadows, the blue column is underclocked memory, so that's 70 frames per second, and the red column is 71, which is out of the box settings, and 73 for the yellow column is the overclocked. Okay, so looking at those, if I was needing to reduce heat on my system, it would make sense to underclock the memory, okay, because there's not going to be much effect upon the frames per second. If we go to Rise of the Tomb Raider, it's a little bit more of an effect, but if I'm trying to target 60 frames per second, well, if I have average 65, I think that would be fine. So now we go to Death Stranding, and of course the same sort of situation there. Really no harm in underclocking the memory there. Now, Far Cry New Dawn. Now, this is a little bit deceiving because with Far Cry, you can actually do this adaptive resolution. And basically, you can choose the settings to have the game just target 60 frames per second and adjust the resolution to reach that level. So it's great. Some games have these settings, and so far, I'm just really happy with that type of system. All right, the next one, Hitman 3 Dartmoor. Okay, so there's barely any effect by changing the frequency of the memory. So yes, just underclocking in Hitman, it would be perfectly fine. especially if you've ever played that game. It's not a first-person shooter. You don't need massive frames or anything like that to play it smoothly. Okay, control ray tracing. Now here's the one where I would probably really think about my options. I would want that 56 frames per second, so I would want to overclock the card if I could, with the overclocking the memory and the core clock. So that's something that I would look at a bit more and make a decision from there. Okay, the next game is Cyberpunk with ray tracing, and there's not a huge effect by underclocking the memory, and again 64 frames per second if we're averaging that with full ray tracing. Hey, that's fantastic. So just to sum up a bit, I have found that the 3060 12GB is a great card for 4K gaming, 60 frames per second. And these days, with the settings within games, you can just sort of tweak them a bit to target that 60 frames per second. Now, I had a bit of trouble doing that with Control, but that's really the only game that I've had trouble so far. This is MSI Afterburner. So basically, at the moment, our power limit is set at 100%. Temperature limit is at 83 degrees C. The core clock is at its out-of-the-box setting, so it has been changed by 0 megahertz. The memory is also out of the box settings, and it has been changed by 0 megahertz. Okay, so it has not been changed, is what I'm trying to say. The current base frequency of the 3060 12GB that I'm using is 1492 megahertz. That's out of the box. And the memory is at 6798 megahertz. Okay, so basically, I'll show you real quick my fan curve, which is rather important that you have your fan set. So if I go into the settings, a little cogwheel, and then I click fan, this is my fan curve, and this will be applied to whatever profile that I choose. This same fan curve will be applied. Okay, so I currently have it running at 65% capacity, the fan's at 65%, from 0 to 60 degrees Celsius. Okay, so I just find that that works real good. They're nice and quiet at that level, and that just keeps them cooled down when they're just doing little things, right? So when I start to game, then the fans will kick up to 80% at 60 degrees. Once they hit 65 degrees, it's going to kick up to 90%. Once I hit 70 degrees, it's going to kick up to 95% fans. And then once it hits 73 degrees, it is going to be at 100% fans, okay? So that's obviously the maximum. So that's how the fan curve works. And we'll just carry on from there. Okay, so also in the settings here, you can create an on-screen display where you can have data of temperature and stuff showing up on your screen if you wish. So that is under on-screen display and monitoring. Okay, so for instance, I've got the GPU temperature in on-screen display and a temperature alarm as well. So if it goes over So if it hits 70 degrees, then basically it turns red in color. Okay. All right. So we won't go too much further into those today. Now, so when I go to change my frequencies, what I've been taught to do is to put the power limit up to the max along with the temperature limit. Now that doesn't mean that it's just going to have 111% power and 90 degrees C. No, that's just allowing the car to do what it wants to do. Okay, it can apply the amount of power it wants to and up to the temperature limit that it wants to. And I keep an eye on my temperatures anyways, so it shouldn't ever go up that high. Now, if I'm overclocking my card, I was using 196 increase, 196 megahertz. I got a couple crashes, so I'm going to just decrease that a little bit down to 179. Okay, and if I move this all the way to the left, it's minus 502 megahertz. Okay, so that's underclocking the memory. This one is underclocking the memory. The core clock has been overclocked by 179, and the memory clock has been decreased by minus 502. Now, to activate that, I would click this. Okay, and if I want to save those settings, I will come over here and click this little diskette, and all these will start flashing, and I choose a number. So I can choose number 4. Okay. Now, if I go and change anything and activate it, then I want to go back to that profile 4, I just click it and click the tick. And so that activates the minus 502 on the memory clock and the plus 179 on the core clock. Okay, and so you can see that the frequency of the memory is here, and it has been reduced. And this is the base clock, core clock, and that has been increased, and it will boost higher than that. Okay, so those are just the basics of how I use it. Don't worry about this flashing yellow warning. I actually have my FPS counter set on alarm so that it turns red in color. Nothing to worry about there. Thanks for joining us here on PC Gaming Tech Summary. And don't forget, you'll be seeing me in the next video. Hey, no, no, no.